Well, what should an employer do if it becomes aware of an issue of an employee's past? Well, Joydeep Kaur joining us now from People and Culture Strategies. Joydeep, great to have you back. Good to talk to you. So, an employee's past, how relevant is that? And are you seeing perhaps an increase in concerns there?
Yeah, absolutely. This has become a little bit of an alarming trend over the last few months, and probably going back a year or so, where a number of employers are finding that there are issues that are being brought to their attention relating to one or more of their current employees, but what's different about what's coming to their attention is it doesn't necessarily relate just to what that employee may have done during the course of their employment with that employer. Instead, it might be something that relates to something they did at a previous organisation. In fact, a matter that I've had to advise on quite recently relates to an employer who was made aware of an incident that took place when one of their employees was in fact at school, going back some 15, 16 years. The matter in that particular instance, and in a lot of these situations, certainly might sound alarming to the employer. It involves one of their employees. Potentially, the employer thinks it might involve their own brand, but it's certainly something that's becoming a trend. And a lot of employers are really struggling with, well, is this something we need to action? Is this something we should be doing something about? Are we okay to ignore it because it's not something that happened on our watch? So these are the kinds of issues that employers are facing on this subject.
Yeah, it's actually something also we've seen in politics too, isn't it? Perhaps with some dubious social media posts in the past that come back to haunt candidates. So is this the same then we're seeing in the workplace that, particularly given that everything on social media, in fact, ends up online, that it's fairly easy to actually look back at a employee's past?
That's right. And I think there's two separate issues here. So one is the method whereby that matter has been escalated. So social media and the numerous platforms whereby employers and people within employers are making themselves accessible, whether that's through official whistleblowing hotlines or whether it's just contact numbers or direct messages on Instagram or whatever it might be. So that's the first part of it, whereby that ease of access is really triggering a lot more of these kinds of matters. The second is, of course, that the social media does mean that there are or is greater awareness of what might serve to be some triggers for someone to make this kind of complaint. So let's assume that this particular complaint or any particular complaint is something akin to a vendetta or some form of retribution for something that has happened to someone in their past. What social media does and what general information sharing platforms do in this day and age is they will make someone more aware or more visibly conscious of what that person who allegedly did this to them many years ago has gone on to achieve. So the fact that they see that person is running for office, they see that person is now in a senior role at a publicly listed organisation because that's popped up on a Facebook feed or whatever it might be. So the catalysts and triggers for a person wanting to or feeling the need to make this kind of escalation, complaint, grievance, call it what you will, has been massively exacerbated through social media. So there's a couple of different elements in this.
What rights does an employer have to take action when perhaps this may well point to a failure in their own due diligence in selecting this candidate and that they haven't looked at their past?
Yeah, really good point. So a lot of employers will ask generalised questions at the time of recruitment. But a lot of those questions will be very focused on the capacity of the employee to do the role for which they are being hired. It's unusual that an employer would say, is there anything in your past that you want to share with us that you think could become a relevant issue for us if we become aware of it 10, 15 years down the track? I mean, the nature of that question is almost somewhat absurd, but really, if an employer takes these matters seriously and has formed a view, which they don't have to form, but I can understand why certain companies and organisations would form this view that we want to be forewarned and forearmed about anything, and therefore we want to ask these questions in a generalised way. Well, I think the consequence of doing that is that a lot of employees will be very apprehensive and may not be entirely truthful because they will apply their own threshold as to whether something is relevant or not to share with a prospective employer. Something that I might have done 15, 20, 30 years ago when I was at school or whatever, surely cannot be relevant to whether I'm going to be a suitable candidate for a role that I'm applying for. But when you fast forward, and even if I've been in that role, and even if I've done a good job in that role, what if something comes up? And what if something that does come up is particularly heinous? And my employer thinks, gosh, how could you have not shared that with us at the time of recruitment? So this is why this is becoming a real problem.
So what are the obligations for the employee then? What rights do they have? I mean, do they feel obligated to share perhaps some of their dubious history there and say, look, I've learned my lesson? Or if they are accused of something, what are their rights?
Yeah, so employees have a lot of rights in these situations. One would be that if they have potentially been defamed by the person who has brought this matter to their employer's attention, that is absolutely something that they might wish to explore. And indeed, even if the matter that is being alleged is true, that's not necessarily going to constitute a complete defence to it potentially being defamatory. Employees have rights in accordance with their contracts of employment. Employees have rights to be shown natural justice and procedural fairness by their employer if their employer is proposing to take any action. Certainly an employee who might pay the ultimate price and lose their job as a result of something like this may have access to unfair dismissal remedies and things like that. But it's a tricky one because I think most employees, and living and breathing this as I do, would look at something like this and say, well, I understand that I've got to comply with my employer's policies. The clock for that starts ticking when I sign that contract or when I first show up for work on day one. And while I'm there, I have to play by the rules. But those were not the rules that applied to me 5 years ago. They weren't even the rules that applied to me 2 days before I started working at that organisation. So why should I feel that I somehow have to go through this cleansing or purification exercise of disclosing everything that I might have done? But as we know, certainly in more public arenas, and politics is a great example and very timely, if you don't do that, there will be views that may be formed against you. But if you do it, those views may well be formed against you anyway. So the rights of the employees and the obligations of the employees are very challenged.